Hi guys, how's it going? Ivano here, and today I want to talk about which Warzone has the best and I guess also the worst performance in this game. And this is data from just a little bit over 100 Warzones, so I'm not claiming that this is some kind of scientific experiment. But I think everyone that played PvP in this game definitely had some feeling for some time that some maps lag more than others. And so I wanted to see which maps are the best and which perform the worst. So I went ahead and measured my average FPS and then also the 1% low FPS, so kind of the most laggy moments, and then compared all of the Warzones that I played over the course of, I think, roughly a month. So the one with the best performance was Orbital Station, so that's an arena. As everyone knows, I don't really play that much arena, but the FPS I got in this case, in this one game, was a whopping 178 on average with 81 minimum FPS. And you can see this trend kind of holds up for the other arenas I played, Corellia Square and one game of Mandalorian Battle Ring. The average FPS was in any case in the 170s, and even the worst moments with 81 and 78 FPS were still quite acceptable. And this is not surprising. I mean, it makes total sense if you think about it. In the arena, you simply have 4 players on each team, whereas in a Warzone you can have 16. And in that case, it just means that in an arena, there's only half the amount of buffs and debuffs that the game has to simulate. So the performance will be better in an arena compared to a Warzone. And we can see that when we look at the first Warzone. And I think to not many players' surprise, Nowhere Coast, favorite for many players, certainly one of my favorite Warzones, because it lends itself very nice to fighting. And at least in my experiment, I got 9 Nowhere Coasts over the course of total, I think, 106 Warzones. And it was the best performing 8v8 map with 141 FPS on average and 49.8 on the 1% lows. After it followed Odesscent, and this one might be a little surprise for some people. Now I have to slightly caveat the results here. I think Odesscent might not be the best performing or the second best performing Warzone in the game, but maybe the, let's say, good FPS result here is helped a little by the fact that in Odesscent there's actually not so much fighting going on, because after you wipe the enemy team once, maybe they will respawn on the other side of the map, and there's a lot of like smaller scale fights going on because there are so many different objective control zones. So in a way, Odesscent, you could say, is almost more similar to one of the arenas where often you have 3v3s and 4v4 fights going on. But the data is what the data is. Odesscent, I played a total of 6 games and the average FPS was 136, so the second best Warzone. Afterwards, we have Yavan Ruins. 9 games, so this is basically the newer Civil War map. I was a little bit surprised by this one. Personally, I thought the performance was not that good, but I guess the data speaks against it. Total of 9 games with 128 average FPS. And the 1% lows were actually a little bit better than on Odesscent even. Now, Ancient Hypergate. So the first thing interesting here is that Ancient Hypergate, and this was also my gut feeling, is by far the most common Warzone map that popped. So out of 100 games, almost 1 in 4 was a Hypergate. So yeah, I think whoever owns the Hypergate map paid broadsword to tune up the pop frequency on that one. And it's of course definitely one of the objective players' favorites. But at least the performance is quite decent, 124 FPS on average, so not as good as Nowhere. But the 1% lows, 41.9, at least on my PC, are still quite decent. I think Voidstar was the second most common map, if I'm not mistaken, with 14 games out of roughly 100. Voidstar, of course, is a crowd favorite, has been in the game since the launch, even though it was slightly changed. 117 FPS and 36 on the lows. It's not the best, but I think on Voidstar there are a lot more Zergs than maybe on other maps. So it's kind of the opposite of Odesscent. I personally really like Voidstar. I like to play for the fights on that map, even though the average FPS, at least in my experiment, were not the best. Next one, we have the Pit, which is of course the classic Hotball map. Very similar performance to Voidstar. And I have to retract what I just said about the second most common map. Hotball, or at least classic Hotball, also pops quite a lot. I had 17 games of that, so slightly more common than Voidstar and just a little bit behind Ancient Hypergate. Next we have Aldderon Civil War with 12 games and also 112 average FPS. So you can see it's, yeah, performs kind of similar to classic Hotball. Of course, that map also comes from a similar era. And the average FPS with 34 are, to be honest, quite a lot below Nowhere Coast. Maybe this is just variance. But yeah, Civil War performed quite poorly, at least in my experiment. Finally, we have Vani Nutball. The 1% lows here are a little bit better than in Aldderon Civil War. Only 7 games, so I guess the sample size is not the largest. So not a very common map, but 110 average FPS. It's definitely one of those maps that if it pops, I'm not the happiest. There are a lot of desync issues going on as well when people speed over the ledges and so on. The asset traps are fun, but otherwise I'm not a big Vani enjoyer, and I think the performance might be one of the reasons why that's the case. And finally, we have the worst performing map in the game. I think the thumbnail maybe spoiled it already a little bit, but in a way the experiment here kind of confirmed what I knew, or like the feeling that I already had, and that is of course that Quash Hotball is the worst map in the game, with 110 average FPS, actually tied with Vani, and the 1% lows only 34.2, even on a relatively high-end modern PC. So yeah, the only saving grace for this map is that it doesn't pop that often, and hopefully it stays that way. So that's all I have for today, guys. Let me know in the comments below if that is also your experience, which of these is your favorite map. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please remember to leave it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.